The New York Times just held a focus group with 11 undecided swing voters to find out how they feel about Donald Trump's conviction, and some of the answers we got were wild. I want to break that down and break down some new polling we got that is looking pretty good for President Biden. But when asked why they're undecided, Ben, a 42-year-old from Texas who's white and a college advisor, said this: "A couple people have mentioned a massive judicial conspiracy of everybody going after him. Okay, let's talk conspiracy math here. The sheer number of people who would have to be working together to get something like this working just boggles the mind. And have you ever tried to get 4 people to agree on what to order for pizza? I just don't see this working out. At the end of the day, okay, fine. I'm going to side with Jonathan on this one, saying, what's the big deal about bribing Stormy Daniels? But I want a president who's going to be able to cover up a $130,000 bribe to Daniels. If he can't pull that off, I'm not going to trust him with the nuclear football. This seems like such an easy thing for him to screw up. I'm kind of leaning toward Biden now." And this is such a swing voter mentality, because Ben isn't saying that he wants a president who commit crimes, but he's saying if you're gonna commit crimes, at least do it in a competent way. Because there are legal avenues to make hush money payments, but Donald Trump messed up so badly, he somehow turned a simple hush money payment into 34 felony counts. And competence permeates through every aspect of someone's life. So if you're a billionaire who can't even make a simple $100,000 payment without getting felony convictions, then you're probably not a competent human being, and I think that's what Ben's getting towards here. But the way he arrived there is incredibly funny. At the end he says, "I'm kind of leaning toward Biden now," after talking about how Trump failed to commit crimes without getting caught. But I'll take the win if we can get it. There were some other incredibly interesting answers that could give us a peek into the mind of undecided swing voters, so let's go through some of them. When asked whether this represents the best or worst of democracy, Hillary, 55, from California, a white social worker, said, "This is the system, whether we like it or not. The prosecution presented arguments. Was it upsetting as an American to have a former president being investigated and then prosecuted? Absolutely. But ultimately, it was adjudicated by a group of his peers in Manhattan. The system worked. I don't necessarily have to like the outcome." That is a very mature take. Of course, it's terrifying to see a former president getting prosecuted and convicted, but if they deserve it, then they deserve it. That is a system working as intended, and I'm glad Hillary recognizes that. But James, 53, from Iowa, said, "They've been going after Trump since he was elected in 2016. Democracy is supposed to be about the will of the people. I don't really think the majority of the people in this country wanted to see him prosecuted on these charges." But polling does say otherwise. The majority of Americans think that Donald Trump was rightfully convicted, so this swing voter is wrong. And these next answers were great. They gave me hope. So when asked, did the decision have any impact on how you will vote, Ben, the same dude from earlier, 42, Texas white, said, "So now it's down to voting for the convicted felon or voting for Biden, the super old, out of touch guy. I don't really like either of those choices, but I think I'm going to go with the old guy losing his mind over the convicted felon who's probably going to be out for blood as soon as he's elected. It's like I'm in Poland trying to choose between the Nazis and the Soviets. I'm just going to flip a coin, but probably voting for Biden. I don't know if I'll vote." So while I don't necessarily agree with Ben's characterization of Biden as out of touch and super old, I mean, of course Biden is old, but he's still incredibly competent. I wouldn't say he's out of touch. I think this is a really important thought process for us to understand when talking about independent or swing voters. So Ben is saying, even though Biden is old, he recognizes the threat that Donald Trump poses and that Donald Trump would be out for revenge during his second term. So that tells us that Democrats really need to be hammering home on this revenge messaging, that Donald Trump is only out for retribution to get the people back that wronged him. And if that messaging can resonate with swing voters like Ben, that is a win for the Democrats. Logan, 31, from Oklahoma, white, said, "For me, it is exactly what Ben said. It's the real fear of the retribution. I think we got skin to teeth thin on our democracy staying together. And this time, he knows where the pitfalls are and the places that he needs to appoint people who can really get retribution." Then Jonathan, 37, Florida, black, said, "This is the fear-mongering that the left wants. They want you to be swayed." Logan replied, "No, it's not." Jonathan then replied, "They want you to say he's a convicted felon, so maybe I shouldn't vote for him. Well, he's not going to jail, so you don't have to wonder about how that will work." Logan then said, "Jonathan, I'm a smart guy. No left-wing or right-wing media has any effect on the way I think about things. I'm a veteran of the United States Marine Corps Infantry. It's not that anyone is scaring me. It is what I have seen and what people in positions of power are capable of in the justice sphere. There are just as as many people in the right wing that say nothing happened on January 6th. And you can look at the tapes. It is real. People died, and that was over an election. Frank, 65, from Arizona said, no left-wing party or person or individual caused Donald Trump to do a payoff. That is a great point. None of this was caused by the left wing, as Jonathan is implying. Jonathan then said, but it's such a small, petty crime to charge a former president with. Logan, 31, said, it is, yes. Jonathan said, and so we've weaponized the justice system to attack our political opponents. Logan said, no, that was prosecutorial discretion. Alvin Bragg is the only person that is deciding these things. That is not a left-wing agenda, Jonathan. I honestly really like the healthy debate going on during this roundtable or during this focus group. It's good that these people, these independent voters, are pushing back on each other. Regarding whether this will change their vote or not, Hillary said, I am somebody who is desperate to try to honor the system. He's now a convicted felon. I cannot have the president be a convicted felon, full stop. Therefore, he is disqualified for me. Despite my absolute concerns about the mental fitness and policy disagreements that I have with Joe Biden, I cannot envision casting a vote for Donald Trump. Frank from Arizona then said, he's disqualified for me, too. As a president, you're supposed to be setting an example, not making an example of yourself in a negative way. Second of all, with regard to what Hillary said about he's a convicted felon, okay, the particular charge is not something that I think qualifies or disqualifies you for being a president. Everybody bribes someone somewhere, but there's 2 other cases pending. And again, innocent until proven guilty, but they're much more serious charges of the January 6th insurrection and then trying to fix on election. So those 2 answers were also incredibly interesting as well. What Hillary, who's 55 from California and white, is telling us there is that she cannot vote for a convicted felon. I'm sure a lot of swing voters feel this way. Either it's leaving a bad taste in their mouth right now, or when they show up to vote on November 5th, they'll realize, I just cannot bring myself to vote for a convicted felon. And if a lot of voters feel that way, that is a massive win. And then Frank built on that by saying, it's not even about this particular charge, the falsifying business record charge. That's not even why he's disqualified, but he has these other cases going on that, number 1, are way worse. Number 2, he is now a convicted felon, whether the charges were substantial or not, and he's just not setting an example that a president should set. So that is a very interesting insight into the minds of some swing voters. But the cool thing is, we got some polling that backed up this sentiment exactly. The New York Times said, we reached nearly 2,000 people who participated in previous Times Siena polls to see if any had changed their minds, and they're talking about after Trump's conviction. It's one of the biggest questions in the wake of Donald J. Trump's conviction. Did the verdict change anyone's mind? Early on, the answer appears to be an equivocal yes. In interviews with nearly 2,000 voters who previously took New York Times Siena College surveys, President Biden appeared to gain slightly in the aftermath of Mr. Trump's conviction last week for falsifying business records. The group favored Mr. Trump by 3 points when originally interviewed in April and May, but this week that same group backed him by only 1 point. So they recontacted with nearly 2,000 voters, and before, in May, Trump was up 3. It was 48 to 45, but now Trump is up 1, 47 to 46. But the details of this poll is where things really get interesting. So they say, overall, Mr. Trump retains 93% of voters who told us they backed him in a previous survey, a tally that's yet another striking show of political resilience from a candidate who is facing 3 more sets of criminal indictments. But in a close election, losing 7% of your supporters can be decisive. It can change the outcome of the election. In recent polls, Mr. Biden either leads or is within 2 points of Mr. Trump in states and districts worth the 270 electoral votes required to win. A potentially crucial silver of Mr. Trump's former supporters, 3% now told us they'll back Mr. Biden. 3% is a massive number, guys, while another 4% say they're now undecided. So they say the shift was especially pronounced among the young, non-white, and disengaged Democratic-leaning voters who have propelled Mr. Trump to a lead in the early polls. Of the people who previously told us they had voted for Mr. Biden in 2020 but would vote for Mr. Trump in 2024, around 1/4 now say they would instead stick with Mr. Biden. That is a massive number right there. 1/4 of the people who originally said they would switch votes will now go back to President Biden. And the demographics of this poll are incredibly interesting because Donald Trump has been gaining ground primarily with young, disengaged voters, people who don't really pay attention to politics and get their news from social media rather than mainstream legacy media, if you want to call it that. So this poll saying that young, non-white, and disengaged Democratic-leaning voters who have been leaning towards Donald Trump are now coming home to the Democratic Party after this conviction, that could be a huge swing right there. If we can have Donald Trump's conviction penetrate into some of these alternative media sources like TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, then I think a lot of these disengaged voters will continue to come home. These disengaged, non-white, non-political people who just vaguely are anti-establishment, and Donald Trump uses that anti-establishment rhetoric. So some really interesting breakdowns coming out of this New York Times focus group and this New York Times poll. I think as the election gets closer, we'll see more people come home. We'll see more independent swing voters start to say they are staunchly in the pro-Biden group. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, comment a blue heart if you made it all the way through. I read all the comments, even if I can't always respond. Hit that subscribe button and have a great day.